You won't believe what just went down in that Senate room. Picture this. A single senator, cool as ice, starts asking simple questions about one of the biggest promises this government ever made. And within minutes, everything unravels. The big talk about saving the planet, putting Australia on the global stage, hosting the world's most important climate summit right here in Adelaide. It all starts crumbling right in front of our eyes. Senator Jane Hume didn't yell. She didn't rant. She just kept asking the same thing over and over. Asterisk who's actually in charge of this COP31 bid. Asterisk who's driving it. What's the Prime Minister doing day to day to make sure we win? And the answers that came back. Pure chaos. Department after department pointing fingers at each other. Not us. Ask them. It's a whole of government thing. The PM raises it sometimes. Seriously, that's the level of leadership we're getting for something that's supposed to be a defining moment. For Australia, let's rewind. Back in late 2022, the Prime Minister stood shoulder to shoulder with Minister Chris Bowen and announced with full fanfare, Australia is bidding to host COP31, the first ever Pacific COP. The idea was brilliant on paper. Bring 80,000 delegates to Adelaide. Shine a global spotlight on the existential crisis facing our Pacific neighbors. Boost our economy, showcase clean energy leadership, prove we're serious about climate action. It sounded like a win-win. But fast forward to that Senate estimates hearing, and the reality hits like a freight train. Hume kept pushing. How many times has the project board even met? Less than 5 times in 3 years? Are state governments involved? What about contingencies if we have to share hosting with Turkey? Is Adelaide even ready for that kind of influx? Hotels, airports, security, everything. And the responses, crickets, deflection. That's for another department. We don't handle logistics. PM and C isn't directly involved. It was like watching a house of cards collapse in slow motion. Officials admitted the Prime Minister might mention it in meetings with world leaders. But the real diplomatic heavy lifting left to mid-level bureaucrats. The hard negotiations with Turkey, someone else's problem. No one could say with a straight face that the bid was being driven from the top with urgency. And that's when it became crystal clear. This wasn't just his stalled bid. It was a bid that never had the muscle behind it. The tension in that room was electric. You could almost feel the officials squirming. Because Hume wasn't attacking the idea of hosting COP. She was exposing the gap between the glossy announcements and the actual execution. And the gap was massive. Years of talk about existential threats and global leadership. But when it came to the nuts and bolts, coordination, accountability, resources, it was a mess. Now, here's the kicker. While this hearing was happening, Turkey wasn't sitting idle. They were playing hardball, refusing to budge, building alliances, and Australia. We were still debating internal roles and meeting minutes. No wonder the bid dragged on and on, bleeding taxpayer money, while the clock ticked closer to the deadline dot, and then, just when everyone thought it couldn't get worse, it did. In November 2025, at COP30 in Brazil, Australia finally threw in the towel. Turkey wins COP31. Antalya gets the main event. We get a consolation prize. Chris Bowen as president of the negotiations. A pre-COP meeting somewhere in the Pacific. And some vague promises about elevating island nation voices. Let's be honest. This wasn't a win-win compromise. It was a retreat. A retreat dressed up as strategy. The government spent millions, state and federal, on consultants, lobbying, planning. South Australia poured cash into preparations that will never happen. Pacific leaders who pinned their hopes on a true Pacific-hosted summit left disappointed, feeling like their cries for help were just photo-op material. So what does this say about the government's real priorities? They've spent years telling us climate is the defining challenge of our time. They've lectured the world about moral responsibility. But when it came to delivering something concrete, securing the biggest climate stage on Earth, they couldn't even get their own house in order. The hearing exposed something deeper, a pattern, big announcements, grand visions, zero follow-through, photo ops with world leaders, but no real arm-twisting when it counts, promises to the Pacific, but not enough fight to back them up. And in the end, ordinary Australians pay the price, not just in wasted money, but in lost credibility. Because if we can't even win a bid we desperately wanted, how can we claim to lead on the world stage? Think about the missed opportunity. Imagine the headlines if we'd pulled it off. Australia hosts historic Pacific COP. World turns to down under for climate solutions. Instead, we get Australia drops bid after years of stalemate. The contrast couldn't be starker. And don't get me started on the human cost. Pacific communities staring down rising seas. Stronger storms, disappearing shorelines. They needed a loud voice. They needed the world to see their reality up close. Instead, they're left with a pre-meeting somewhere and a few paragraphs in the final text. It's heartbreaking. Meanwhile, back home, families are struggling with energy bills, housing shortages, cost of living pressures. Governments tell us to tighten our belts while pouring resources into vanity projects that go nowhere. It erodes trust. It makes people cynical. And it should. Senator Hume didn't just ask tough questions that day. She held up a mirror. And what we saw wasn't pretty. A government that talks a great game but stumbles when it's time to play. The lesson here is simple. Words aren't enough. Announcements aren't enough. You need focus. You need accountability. You need leaders willing to roll up their sleeves and fight for what they promise. Anything less, and you end up exactly where we are now, watching someone else take the prize we claimed was ours. So next time a politician stands at a podium promising the moon, remember this moment. Remember the Senate room where the emperor had no clothes, because the truth came out, not with fireworks, but with quiet, relentless questions that exposed the whole charade. Australia deserved better. The Pacific deserved better. And the planet, it deserved a real leader, not just more hot air.